Hey everyone, how you doing? Thank you so much for those remarks. Really appreciate it, Major General Whitney. My name's Kyle Boat. I'm an advisory director at KPMG, and I'm really excited to see everyone here today. Really excited to be here. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. I've focused a lot of my career on bespoke product and experience design, innovation, and behavioral research. And I've spent time leading technology transformations and business strategy transformations for a lot of different organizations in many different industries and across the world. And one of the things that I've seen is that, organizations, they get the strategy, right? They get the technology, right? But it's really about the people. The people are the ones that really bring it all together. It's that element that folks often forget. So the collective experience, the culture that individuals have in an organization, the way that they do things, the behaviors that they tolerate, and those that they uplift are really the drivers that bring those organizations to the next level. At Space Force, that culture is referred to as the guardian spirit. And as part of the guardian spirit, the warfighting ethos is a topic that gets debated often in context of the guardian experience. Having had the opportunity to interview numerous Guardians, many have told me things like, space is hard. If you want me to be an elite warfighter, train me like an elite warfighter. It's a mindset change. We need to have people who see space as a warfighting domain, and we don't see people that see it as a warfighting domain yet. And it's a completely different environment. When we deploy, we're not in the trenches covered with mud. We spend 12 hours in a skiff. We use physics and chemistry for warfare instead of guns and bullets, and it's a defining trait. So with the warfighting ethos in mind, here to provide a keynote today is Major General Brook J. Leonard, whose illustrious career spans several decades. He's an accomplished and highly respected military leader who has made significant contributions to the United States Space Force and the Joint Forces. Currently, he is the Deputy Commander and Director of Operations for Combined Joint Task Force Space Operations at Peterson Space Force Base. In this role, he leads global operational level planning, fires, and maneuvers to maintain U.S. and allied advantage in space in support of joint forces and global security. Before assuming his current position, Major General Leonard served as the Chief of Staff for the United States Space Command, where he led the stand-up of the 11th Combatant Command from inception to beyond initial operational capability. As a general officer, he commanded the 56th Fighter Wing at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona and the 321st Air Expeditionary Wing and Task Force Air Union 3 in Baghdad, Iraq, where he led task-organized units across 11 locations in Iraq and Syria to defeat the Islamic State group and enable security across Iraq. He has also commanded numerous other units, including the 16th Weapons Squadron, United States Air Force Weapons School, Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, the 451st Expeditionary Operations Group in Kandahar Airfield, Afghanistan, and the 51st Fighter Wing in Onsan Air Base in South Korea. He's earned many awards and decorations, including the Defense Superior Service Medal with the Oak Leaf Cluster, the Legion of Merit with 2 Oak Leaf Clusters, and the Bronze Star Medal. And he has over 3,000 flight hours, including 576 combat hours. So, without further ado, let us welcome Major General Brook J. Leonard. Sir?
All right. If we could turn this on, that'd be great. Hey, good morning, everybody. It's truly an honor to be here. What a great day. I'm glad it's not Monday. For those of you who are in town or saw the news, we almost floated away here in Colorado Springs. But it is an honor to be here, and thank you to NSSA and KPMG for putting this on. I love culture, because culture is about winning. And so to be here today to talk about that imperative is truly an honor. It is fraught with danger, though. So I want to kind of start off first is I'm going to talk about what is culture from a warfighting perspective. I'm going to talk about why it's important, and I'm going to talk about how you build it. But first, we need to think through what it is. And so the culture word is like the word love. I love Reese's peanut butter cups. I love my wife. Those are vastly different uses of that word. And so as we go into this conversation, one danger is to dismiss. Say, hey, that's not me. And I'll tell you, if you like the American way, if you want to be relevant, if you want to succeed, regardless of the uniform you wear, regardless of how old you are, regardless of what your job is, culture, and particularly a warfighting culture, is really important. The other thing about culture is that it's not a yes but. It's a yes and discussion. And so as we go through this, think of this as sort of additive thoughts as we try to build as a team a warfighting culture across Title 10, Title 50, allies, partners, commercial, civil, military. We need to work on this together. And so with that, and since we're right before lunch and we've been going out for a while, I'm going to start off with a pop quiz. Next slide. All right, so the Guardian values. Which one do you think is most important to a warfighting mindset? That's a good answer. I'll give you a clue. Next slide. Thoughts? Yes? I need a better one than that. All right. So I'm going to propose, I like yes, absolutely do, but I'm going to propose that connection is the most important value. Connection is about winning. Connection is about every kind of connection that you can think through. It gets us to winning. It produces that warfighting value. It also is how you build it. And so it's pretty useful in the fact that it's not only what we need to win, but it provides that warfighting value, and it's the path to get there. And so that's why I will propose, and over the next couple of slides, try to unpack why I think connection is most important, why I think that actually gets us to winning, and how we build that. So you got the Spartan Army, if you will, 300, if folks have seen that. They have their famous shields, obviously, forming an incredible line of defense. They used to say, come home with your shield or come home on it. And the idea was you wore your shield on your right arm. And on your left arm. And you formed this incredible phalanx next to your buddy, next to your buddy, next to your buddy. And the idea was the shield actually didn't protect you. It protected the person to your left. And so how did the Spartans get after the mission? They got after the mission by taking care of the person to your left. That's the first piece of connection that's so important. It's individual. It's an N of one. It's me and you. It's not me as a major general and you as a specialist. It's me and you as individuals, as humans, as who we are. Next slide. It's also a connection to winning, and it has to start there. So this is the British cycling team in 2012 on their way to what would be 66 Olympic medals over the course of 10 years. But it didn't start right here. It started back in 2003 when they hired Dave Brailsford. So up until this time, British cycling was pathetic. Sorry, anybody that, maybe has history in the UK. It was awful. For 100 years, they had only won one gold medal going back to 1908. There were European bike manufacturers that would not allow the British cycling team to ride their bikes because that would be bad advertising. It was bad. So in 2003, they hired someone who was focused on winning. And Dave took his team and they did the standard things. They worked out really hard. They focused on their diet. But he did everything because winning was so important. And how you do anything is how you do everything. Of course, they looked at the bike. Do we have a comfortable seat? They rubbed alcohol on the tires for extra grip. They did other things. They taught all the cyclists how to wash their hands. They brought in a surgeon to do that so they wouldn't get sick, so they could train more. They actually had temperature-controlled shorts to keep their muscles at exactly the right temperature. Every biker found their favorite pillow and their favorite mattress, and they would haul them around. And for those of you who watched maybe the Tour de France, they had all their bikes, but they had all their mattresses. So you'd go into these towns, wherever, and they'd lay their mattress out, and they would get a good night's rest. And they won. Over the time from 2007 to 2017, 178 world championships, 66 gold medals, and 5 Tour de France victories. Pretty incredible. It's about winning. And connection is about connecting our mindset to the fact that ultimately we need to win. Or you could insert success, or you could insert a continuous advantage. But it has this piece that we want to dominate whatever mission set that we're about. Next slide. All right, it's also a connection to the adversary. It's a connection to fighting. It's a connection that acknowledges that you will be opposed in this path towards winning. So I don't know if you guys, probably everybody's seen Braveheart. If you remember, this is Hamish and William Wallace. He drops his rock, right? Challenges him to a test of manhood. Wallace goes, "You win." He goes, "No, this is about soldiery." He's like, "All right, I'll take that bet, if you will." So they're going to toss the rock. All the villagers are kind of gathered around. William Wallace gets in a pretty good throw. Hamish, of course, beats him. And he's kind of shaking his head, and he walks back and he goes, "Can you do it when it counts? Can you do it in battle? Can you kill somebody with that stone?" And he's like, "All right, I'll squish you like a worm." And so Wallace walks out, probably to the exact distance because he's a smart guy. And he says, "I'm not going to move. Try to squish me." And he heaves the stone over Wallace's shoulder. Wallace has picked up a smaller rock, throws it at his forehead, knocks him out, picks him back up later, pats him on the back because they're friends. It's about being able to do it in battle. It's about being able to do it under fire, whatever that looks like for you and your organization. That's the connection that a warfighting mindset needs to and enables. Now, Wallace could have tripped him on the way to throwing the rock. Wallace could have thrown the rock before he even heaved the rock at him. And so China's our pacing challenge. They're not going to sit by and go rock v. rock. They're going to attack our logistics system. They're going to attack our command and control. We're going to be operating along our pace plan for communications. We need to have that mindset and that connection that we will be opposed on our course to winning. And being able to connect enables us to do that. Next slide. It's about a connection to ambiguity. So obviously you have this opponent, and that's really bad, but now we live in this VUCA world. I think it's sort of VUCA plus. We need to come up with maybe another letter or another word just to describe the complexities of our environment. This is a famous photograph or painting called The Wanderer, the Sea of Fog. And so this person is turning to face the wind, the challenge, the difficult, the hard, and is trying to pierce the unknown or risk and to be able to weigh that appropriately. And John Boyd, a great airman, gave us the OODA loop. And there's connection inside of that loop as the wanderer in this case, as warriors in our case, try to understand, try to observe, try to make decisions, and try to act decisively. And then I would add to learn, and that's sort of that loop back. And with individual activities of observing, that's great, or understanding, or deciding, but if you can loop them all together, that's the important piece. And so connection is important as we go about all these different activities to be able to get to decisive action and then learn. Next slide. So the connection to learning, the connection to adapting. This is another one of John Boyd's sort of famous stories. And so he tells about the fact that you need to understand your decision process, and you need to be able to bring in desperate pieces of information, and you need to be able to learn about the environment. So take some TIG treads from the Army, some skis from the Air Force, and an outboard motor from the Navy. And what do you get? I gave you the answer. Boyd asked that question without that cue. Could you put all those things together? And how do you do that best? And I would tell you, one of the best ways of learning is actually getting folks from the outside to reflect. Steve talked about the debrief, having that external feedback. Because a lot of times we bury, or it's just become sort of rote habit in terms of how we decide, what we consider, and what our perspectives are. Without the perspectives and the feedback from other people outside of ourselves, we are not going to be able to learn and adapt to be able to do what we need to win. Next slide. It's also a connection to readiness and preparation. And so this is General Mattis out here with his team, the 1st Marine Division. This is part 1 of what was called the Jersey drills at Camp Matilda in Kuwait. There was 2 exercises prior to this, or rock drills, rehearsal of concept drills. Mattis famously, bought a whole bunch of Legos and started off figuring out how he was going to get his 5,000 Marine vehicles and 20,000 Marines into southern Iraq, up and down chaotic roads in a very chaotic environment, opposed by the enemy. And so he committed and connected with his team and built a shared understanding of the battle space using Legos, and then the world's biggest sandbox. He actually brought in Marine engineers, and they created a replica of southern Iraq, put on these jerseys so they knew whose logistics, who's fire and maneuver, and started walking around and rehearsing what they were doing. Connection across the team, connection to a shared understanding and a shared vision is really important, and that's part of why connecting is so important for warfighting culture. Next slide. All right, a little blurry and maybe a little old. Anybody know this? World of what? Leroy Jenkins. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know the story, and I don't play a lot of these video games, my son does, but here we are in video game land, and there's all these bad people kind of on the other side of this wall off to your left. And they walk in there, they're starting to get beat up, and then they all come back out, and they're all on chat, and talking to each other, and they're like, all right, we need to come up with a plan, like how many spells do you have left, how much power do you have left, and they're starting to create this plan, and Leroy Jenkins decides, I'm going in all by myself, and busts through the door with a Leroy Jenkins call, which I just totally love, and they're like, hey, where's Leroy? What's going on? He walked in. As a good team does, they jump in, but they don't go in with a plan. It's pretty chaotic. They don't do so well. It's a video game, thank goodness. But this is about the connection to teamwork. And teamwork is really about trust. And trust is about two things. Trust is, first of all, doing what's right, sort of the moral, ethical piece of things that's so critical, especially as we conduct warfare. But it's also about delivering. And so if I were to need heart surgery, the person I trust most in the world is my wife, Maria. Is she a good heart surgeon? No. Could she deliver? No. I am not going to ask her to do heart surgery on me. On the other side of the coin, I could get the world's most famous heart surgeon, someone that could absolutely deliver, maybe someone that's delivered multiple times. If that person was unethical, I would also not choose them to perform heart surgery on me. Trust is about two things. Teamwork is about two things. It's that bond that we are heading in the same direction, and that direction is morally and ethically correct. That's the way we fight as Americans. That's the way we succeed in life. And then also the fact that we can deliver. So kind of going back to Mosley that we saw, or Mattis, I'm sorry, from the earlier slide, when he was getting ready to go into Afghanistan, stopped by and talked to the Combined Force Air Component Commander, then General Mosley, and he was trying to decide whether he was going to take artillery to protect his Marines now as he was going into Afghanistan. And Mosley said, I got your back. And he left all the artillery back in storage and on the boat, flew in his Marines, was able to do that very quickly, but was backed up by air power and just that teamwork. And teamwork is important. Trust is how you build it. And both those things build speed and ability. So those are the components, and that's what connection gets you. Next slide. So to bring it all together, those were the what. So when I talk about warfighting culture, it's not a Reese's peanut butter cup. It's not how I feel about my wife. It's about connection. And connection is about winning. And without connection between individuals, without a connection toward we are focused on winning, we are focused on the enemy, we are focused and able to operate in an ambiguous environment, adapt and learn. We're going to rehearse and build that team, and that shared understanding is so important. And even on this slide, strategy, we've heard this quote a ton of times, and I love it because it's like both, right? I want strategy and tactics. What ties strategy and tactics together? It's operational art. And operational art is about taking action and synchronizing them across time, space, and position. And so it's super important that we are able to connect in terms of strategy and tactics. But if we can't connect in all those other ways, we're not going to win. But when we do, that mindset is going to fuel all of our activities, and we are going to be able to succeed in whatever endeavor we do. Next slide. So how do we build it? So this is a picture of an MQ-9 cockpit, if you will. It's a mobile ground control station. Could be anywhere in the world. A lot of them are out at Creech Air Force Base. And in the Air Force, we had a hard time building culture, a warfighting culture, in those folks that flew and were sensor operators inside our remotely piloted aircraft. And so when we finally realized this was an issue, and then when we finally started trying to solve the problem, we started off with stories. And we walked our stories onto target. We walked our stories onto the heart of our airmen. And so I give you that as the first really just tool to be able to use when you want to build a warfighting culture. And what I mean by walked stories onto their hearts, We started off with historical examples of great teamwork. And then we brought it a little bit closer to historical examples of great Air Force teamwork. And then we brought it, no kidding, into their operations. And so we told them stories about B-17 crews in World War II. And then we brought it home and we told them stories of operators that would not go out of the forward operating bases without overwatch from an MQ-9 because they realized the capability that that platform gave them. And then we brought home stories which the operators on the ground in Afghanistan, Iraq, and all over the world actually came and visited these organizations and told them stories of the lives they had saved. They also told them stories of the lives they had lost. And so they shared completely in what was going on. And if you go into RPA squadrons around the Air Force, you'll actually see memorial walls. You'll actually see success based on mission. You'll see all of that. And so we walked that onto their hearts to where they would understand that they were a key piece of that team. Next slide. It's also important to create a crucible and a gate. So Bud's training, if you will. I've never done it. Looks really hard. I'd be glad if I was out there in that surf that I had a buddy hanging on to me. But shared experiences, shared difficulty is really important. And you don't have to go around and roll in the sand. There's easy ways to do that. A hard workout, memorializing a hard activity or a hard situation or exercises. There's lots of different ways you can do that. When those students graduate and become SEALs, they say every day, earn your trident. And so I just like to say to the folks in the room, the Guardians, every day earn your Delta. And whatever that equivalent is in your organization, it's really important, again, to have that crucible and that gate that sets you apart. Having that shared understanding is really key, being proud of that and continue to earn that right to be whoever you are every day. Next slide. And then last but not least, love Yoda, but what I'm using him to represent is leaders, and anybody in this room has to own it. You can't say culture, gosh, when they come out with that guardian ideal, finally we'll be able to instill culture. Or when they finally explain to me why I'm a warrior, then we'll have culture, warfighting culture. Each and every one of you has to own it. And particularly if you're a leader in any form of fashion, and I would apply that name to a lot of you, just getting up in the morning, getting yourself ready, you're leading yourself. If you have responsibility of other people, you're a leader. If you can influence others, you're a leader. But you have to own the culture. You have to own all of those connective attributes and drive those home each and every day. And one of the best ways to do that is not necessarily in training. It's about apprenticeship. In apprenticeship, and the way I break that down is it's important to model, it's important to scale, it's important to fade, and then it's important to coach. So model, first of all, scale, fade, and then coach. Mr. Miyagi is a great example of this. He models, for Sensei, exactly how you do paint the fence. And then he scales. He has them do that, then wax the car, and you name it if you've seen the movie Karate Kid. Goes through all that, and then he fades away and lets him, as Daniel-san, understands, like this is really, he is teaching him about karate. And he fades away and lets him practice and let him work through just the turmoils of competition. But then he's right there by his side coaching him. And so when you look to connect as a leader and you look to sort of build a culture, do it from an apprenticeship model and not, hey, take this test, answer this question, tell me why you're a warrior. Model that, scale that, fade, and let that other person grow theirs, and then coach them along that way. And then on the right side of the chart, and kind of my last point to everybody, there's some internal building that's really important. I've just described that. But you have to externally synchronize your culture with those of the joint force, with those of the intel community, with those of commercial and civil partners. And I'll tell you, in space, from what I've seen, hot and heavy for the last 4 years, if we don't do that, we are going to lose our advantage, particularly with China. As a communist party, they get to integrate all that. We're great. We're great Americans, and we can integrate that even better. But in that picture, you see a PRC 163 on the back of that special operator, made by a commercial company, encrypted by the NSA, with GPS and SATCOM feeds, run by Guardians and a lot of different people being able to keep those satellite constellations up and operational. And then right next to them, and I purposely cut the picture right there, is somebody. Who is that next to that special operator? It's us. It's you. It's their partner, right? Absolutely the spotter in terms of functionality, but without that person next to them, they are not going to be as effective as they can be in battle. And so space has everyone's back. We say that satellites don't have parents, but they are absolutely connected and protect a lot of folks that have parents. And to be able to be that spotter, to be able to be that partner there on the battlefield in whatever way, shape, or form, and integrating your culture and learning from others and learning more about yourself as you learn more about them and building those teams and focusing it on the enemy. That's what it's about. And that's why I propose to you that connection is about winning. And connection builds that warfighting value. And by connecting at an N of one is how you build that. But you have to own it as individuals. And you have to understand that it's important to do that internally and externally. And so that's why I believe that a warfighting mindset is an imperative to our way of life. So thank you. I'll go questions. I know we have just a couple minutes for that, but thanks.
Yeah. Sir, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll just start with one, and then I'll open it up to the rest of the audience here. I know we're the last ones before everybody gets to lunch, but I've got so many questions, and I'm sure you do as well. So, sir, you really talked about what does it take to build that warfighting culture, and you highlighted three really key things. Walk stories onto the hearts of Guardians, the crucible, right? That experience, make it hard, and then lastly, leader accountability, right? Those are all wonderful things in terms of how we create that culture. From where you sit today, just curious, what are the enablers that you see in actually creating that culture through those areas that the Space Force has today? And what are the biggest inhibitors that you see today?
Yeah, great. I'll actually start with the first inhibitor. And I think the first inhibitor is telling someone they can't see themselves in. And then being very clear. So, hey, be a warfighter. Well, I don't know what that means. I don't have a K-bar. Am I a warfighter? And so you get into that Reese's peanut butter cup. And, so define your terms and communicate. And that apprenticeship model, I think, is what I would highlight, because being able to model it and show them what that looks like for them as an individual. Because if the individual doesn't accept that label or doesn't accept that warfighting mindset and connection, you're never going to be able to wire that in parallel across a team, and you're never going to be able to synchronize it across the Joint Force, Title 10, Title 50, commercial, civil. So I think that part's really important. It has to resonate with the individual, and you have to walk through what that means, and so communicating very clearly. But if you try to do the opposite, where you just kind of throw that out there as a term, and you don't really spend that time individually and one-on-one, you're actually going to do more damage than good. And so I think that's one of the inhibitors that I've seen is there's been labels applied without the backing up of communicating the stories and the why. And so that's what I'd give you for the plus. I think you have to define your terms. You have to be very specific. You have to back it up in everything you do with what you reward. That's why I was so excited when I saw that the Space Force did awards for each one of their categories across their values. That's really cool. That's starting to provide those exemplars and things you can point to. And hey, this is what this means. This is why we think this way. This is our culture. And folks will start to do that. But if you try to just make it up and leap forward without defining your terms and really providing the stories, you're going to do more harm than good. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Figured I'd wait for this until bring it. I see nobody else wanted to ask a question, so I figured I'd go ahead.
Awesome.
My name's Chelsea Bottoms. Related to this one.
Okay.
Better half. And Jeff Barnett is my boss.
All right.
So I had a question. We're going to go back to Mattis because he's my favorite commander. No offense, sir. I'm just a retired Marine. So
okay. All right.
I hope you don't blame me for having favorites.
No.
But so when it comes to leadership, correct? You guys have the opportunity as a Space Force and as the current head leadership in the Space Force to develop an absolute amazing force when it comes to leadership and whatnot. And so my question for you is, how do you plan to mitigate what the Marine Corps did? When I say that, it comes to the Marine Corps having problems with their not higher leadership within, the commandant and the sergeant major of the Marine Corps, but within the squadrons themselves. So many Marines have gotten out over the last, I would say, 12 years, especially just with my experience in the last 12 years, because of their leadership. And you guys have the opportunity to build something from the bottom up, and the Marine Corps is already past due on that. So I would say that was my first question. In that aspect, I would say that they deny further education. Sorry, it was kind of a sprung question. So okay. I would say they deny that. They also, there's a difference between a leadership and a boss. And the Marine Corps never supplied, in my experience, training for leaderships. Yes, they supplied the Staff NCO Academy. Yes, they have a corporal's course and a sergeant's course. They leave no room to change those courses for corporals and sergeant's course. And so no one ever develops that leadership capability. They just are bosses. So my question is how you plan to work with that.
Right. No, absolutely. So the first thing I would tell you is that, the way you do anything is the way you do everything, right? And so especially as you're building new, you have lots of opportunities, but you also have lots of challenges. And so I applaud the Space Force for how they've looked at things holistically. I see how they're approaching education and training, see how they're approaching recruiting. They're looking at how their force is designed, officer versus enlisted, how they're doing accessions. And so I think they're, on a good path. It's a good start to be able to do that. But the most important thing is to continue to do that and have that feedback and that accountability loop. And if you don't have that across your entire force, like that last slide, if leaders aren't owning the culture, if leaders aren't owning their actions, if leaders aren't explaining why and connecting the why to the what across the force, you're going to quickly lose that and you'll just fall back into whatever rut you have. But that's dangerous because the Space Force doesn't have a rut. And so now there potentially could be a lot of chaos. And so that's why I say there's lots of opportunities and lots of challenges all at the same time. So the way I think you do that is approach it holistically, like I just talked about, own it individually, and then spend a lot of time continuing to learn and relearn. So the OODA loop that I mentioned, this kind of idea that you're going to continue to look and relook. And then also I would invite an outside perspective. And that's another thing that I think the Space Force has going for it, but also could be a challenge. Bringing in inter-service transfers, that's a great opportunity to leverage folks from other cultures to be able to ask them, like, what do you think of our culture? Or what do you think our culture should be? Or what parts from your culture did you not like? And really have that conversation. I think that's also a great opportunity across the space enterprise. We have to work with commercial space providers. How are we going to do that? We have to work with allies and partners. We have to work with the intel community. When I look at General Dickinson's mission and the amount of intelligence assets he commands as compared to other combatant commanders, way less. Why? Because most of it's in the NRO. Why? Because that's the way we grew up. I'm not saying that's neither good nor bad, but that is a partnership that Space Command and the NRO has to have. Steve mentioned Space Force and the NRO has to have that on the acquisition side as well. So you have to reach out and understand other cultures. And so I would continue to ask those questions, ask for feedback, so you can learn and understand who you are and what you look like to other folks. The challenge there, or the danger there, is as you're trying to create the Space Force and you're trying to create that culture, a lot of times you can just lock down and go, we want to be us. Okay, well, what's us? And so I think there's, again, opportunity and challenge there to do that. But what I've seen so far is I think the Space Force is on the right track. I hope that they can continue to build through that, continue to listen, and also overcome this idea that just because we're not necessarily out on the battlefield firing a machine gun, we don't need to focus and face the enemy. We don't need to think about ambiguity and uncertainty, that we don't need to prep, that we don't need to build mission command and build great teams. So, yeah. Yep. Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Right. Yeah, no, those are all great questions. I would tell you, being in Space Command and the Air Force and not the Space Force, I'm not as well versed in exactly how the Space Force and Guardians are doing that. But what I see externally is they're looking to create sort of like in the Marines, every person a rifleman, right? They're separating out their Guardians in BMT, and they're trying to create, hey, I want to become a Guardian, and then I'm going to become an operator or cyber or other things, acquisitions, etc. So I think that's a good first start, is trying to form that initial core ethos, and then try to make sure that that is then replicated as a Guardian gets to, their first assignment. In the Air Force, which I can speak very specifically of, we changed basic training probably about 10 years ago or so, and we really spent a lot of time talking about our values with our new airmen. And as a wing commander, I saw those airmen come into squadrons that didn't necessarily espouse those same values, or the idea that we wanted to connect, that individuals had worth, and that we were going to communicate really well. And so that was worse than if we had never done that. And so I think it's really important to be consistent. And so as you grow out, not only your training and education sort of milestones, that your experience every day inside the individual units are really important. So the one thing that I would add that I think is really important, and just throw that out to all my Guardians out there in the audience, is, are you doing sort of that revolutionary, evolutionary training with the folks that are already in the Space Force? So as you bring people in and sort of give them that special experience of becoming Guardians, you pour a lot of energy into that. Are you training your frontline supervisors the same way that just assessed from the Army or just assessed from the Air Force? So think about that, to where your entire force gets to shift that mindset at the same time, and so there's not breakdowns in maybe some of the programs you've just recently stood up, and the folks that didn't even go through those because they're a 20-year Guardian just because they transferred over. So I think that would be really important going forward. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
The Air Force was not very well looked upon by other services initially when we stood up. We were desk jockeys and whoever, whatever they wanted to call us. But I think the example you gave where we provided cover to ground troops, I think that's when people started seeing, well, they may not be carrying a gun and going up a hill, but they're going to provide the cover we need so that we can safely get up that hill. If you had a recommendation or a couple of recommendations to Space Force, how could the folks in Space Force not have to deal with those same negative impressions that other services have? Because it really does take every one of our services.
Right. So I don't think you can avoid it. I think it will be there. So you have to remember, the Marine Corps that, oftentimes is so highly vaunted, they started off as a bunch of drunks, in a northeastern bar, right? That's the Marine Corps in 1778. So the reason I bring that up is because it takes time to build credibility, and it takes time to build culture, and there's not a shortcut. And so that's one of the big things that I think is very important to remember. If you try to apply a label, that's a shortcut. If you're not going to take the time to integrate all of your training and train your whole force, and develop a crucible, develop gates, and develop that daily mindset, and reinforce that focus on the enemy as one of the connective pieces, it's not going to happen. In fact, you're going to stunt, and it's going to take you even longer to develop that credibility. So one, you're going to be faced with adversity, right? You're going to be up against Hamish, throwing rocks. Like, you're going to be able to move out under fire. And in this case, it's move out under the cultural fire. I remember even as a lieutenant colonel, I was at the Army War College, and the Army PFT test was 2 miles, and then they had a little sign that said Air Force PFT test that ended at 1.5 miles. And I got constantly ridiculed for that. I'm like, this is so childish, you know? Here we are. We fought together. We've bled together over many years, you know, as the Army and the Air Force. But it was still there. So you're going to be faced with that. So one thing, you just have to recognize that, and you have to be focused on the fact that you're going to be in that environment. So how do you operate in that environment? And again, I think you operate in that environment with integrity and the capability to deliver. And so as an individual guardian, you need to be able to deliver whatever your capability is, not only to your unit, but you need to think about, how do I fit into the larger picture, and how do I deliver that capability to the Delta, and then the Delta to CIFSIC, and then the CIFSIC to Space Command, the Space Command to Indo-PACOM, and then also at an individual level with units that you're supporting. So that's the way I would go about it. Is one, realize that you're gonna take fire for quite some time. You're not going to get it right away. Don't try to take shortcuts, and also do it internally and externally. And by the time you've sort of managed all those pieces, and 5 to 10 years have passed, and also I think that wars and conflicts, not that any of us wish that, those are accelerants. So I don't hope for that. I hope we can sort of build that culture through exercises and other shared experiences. There's plenty of cooperation we need to do to help Ukraine. There's plenty of operations we need to do to deter China. So I think there's opportunities there. But so what I'd give you is, it's going to be hard. Do it internally, do it externally. So, yeah. Good. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Okay.
Rock drills. How do we, as a Space Force, start implementing those core foundations that I feel like really created my warfighter background as a tactical communicator? I feel like those simple things laid the foundation for me to understand what it means to conduct operations, to conduct exercises. And how do I offer that and also create buy-in from my senior leaders as an enlisted member?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one of the accelerants, it's that connection to readiness and preparation that I mentioned. So I've seen real world and exercise, sort of that training, diverge for 2 reasons. Like, you can't do World War III in any training, modeling, and sim environment that I've ever seen. It'd be nice one day, but I just don't think you can do it. There's too many variables. But you can do part task training. And I've seen the difference between sort of exercises and training versus real world differ for 2 reasons. One's resources, and the other's risk. And so, as an example, when I was the wing commander at Osan, the security forces said, we're only defending the northern perimeter. And I'm like, well, like in wartime, don't we have to defend the whole perimeter? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, so tell me why we're only defending the northern perimeter. Like, we don't have enough Humvees. I'm like, why don't you have enough Humvees? Well, like, we didn't get enough out of WRM to do that. And like, why not? And it comes back to, it costs money to take them out, because then you got to sort of change the oil and put them back in. And so that was resources. And so I quickly went, hey, I have to have a budget for exercises and training. So I made a budget line. I took money away from other things we were doing as a wing, and I made sure we had an exercise budget so that we could exercise defending the entire perimeter. And when we did it in the next exercise, they're like, holy cow, we've never done this before, and we had to move ammo around, and we learned so much. And all I'm saying is that you have to, as leaders, dedicate resources, which is time and money. You got to put it on the calendar. It's got to be important to you, and you got to take it out of your checkbook and out of your calendar. So that's the first one. The second one is risk. So same base, Osan, our runway gets simulated bombed by the North Koreans. They're like, all right, so we're going to simulate landing on the taxiway. And I'm like, well, let's just do it. If we're going to simulate, why not just do it? And like, whoa. Like, we're not going to land on the taxiway. I'm like, why not? Like, that's what we would do, right? And like, yeah. And like, we've never done that. I'm like, well, then why is it a simulation? Like, why are we giving ourselves credit for something we've never practiced? Well, it's like risky. I'm like, okay, take an A-10, moves a little bit slower, land it on a sunny day where it's nice and dry with lots of observers, with an instructor pilot that's really good. Okay, nothing happened. All right, great. Land an F-16 on a sunny day, a little bit faster, same, high quality pilot. Okay, that worked. except we need to cut down that tree that's blocking our approach. Okay, cut down the tree. So what I'm saying is that we budgeted it. We made it important to us as leaders in our checkbook and on our calendar. And then the other side, which differs, is risk. And so you can't just overcome that all at once. You have to sort of chew away at it. And so I would offer to you that, hey, we're going to fly this, whatever satellite or shark with laser, over here in the geo. Like, no, that's super risky. Okay, great. Well, let's break down the components of what that is. Maybe we simulate it. Maybe we do whiteboards. Maybe we borrow some General Mattis's Legos. And we kind of go through that piece until we can build up to the point where we're ready to do it more realistically. And that risk isn't there because we've practiced it. And so I would just tell you that you have to have that face the enemy and that connection to rehearsals and the fact that if something isn't rehearsed, it's not a capability. And therefore, you cannot say to someone else in the joint force, I have your back, because you don't know. So I would dedicate time and resources to do it. And then I would break down risk elements into part task training. And I would get to the point where if someone comes to you and says, hey, I'm not taking my artillery into this really bad place. Do you have my back, Guardian? You go, yep, absolutely. And that you can say that. So that's what I'd offer for you on that piece.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I love that question. And I would encourage you to do that with your unit.
So
awesome.
Thank you so much for your time, for being here, for your keynote, thoughtful question responses. Really appreciate it.